Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back to the deep dive.
So for this one, we're looking at a pretty heavy systemic risk assessment. And it suggests something really fundamental has broken in the American system. We're not just talking about a recession or, a bad market cycle. The report is claiming that the actual physics of stability have been inverted.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Inverted.
And the core of this whole thing is a framework they call the 88 regime. It basically sees stability not as a phase you just cycle through, but as a kind of operating mode.
An operating system for the country, almost.
Right. And our mission today is to really get into the justification for their, frankly, shocking finding, which is that the U.S. currently scores a 93 out of 100 on fidelity to this critical 88 regime.
93, it's a huge number.
93%. So what that means, according to these sources, is that 93% of the structural conditions you need for a systemic failure, they're already here. They're locked in.
So we really need to break down the 5 dimensions they use to define this state of what they call behavioral criticality and figure out how we got so close to the absolute maximum fragility.
And that score, that 93 out of 100, it is designed to shock you. But to get it, you first have to make this kind of conceptual leap with them. And that's, I think, the hardest part for people who are used to more traditional analysis.
All right, the usual Wall Street reports.
Exactly. Traditional forecasting uses linear models. It's this idea that the system always, returns to the mean. It rights itself like a ship after a big wave.
That's what they call the linear regime, or the
66.
The 66. It's all based on equilibrium.
So in that mode, if there is a policy mistake or some small crisis, the system has buffers. It has negative feedback loops that just absorb the shock.
Like a big sponge, yeah.
Yeah.
Stability is the default. It's the attractor. But the critical regime, the 88, this is where they bring in things like non-equilibrium thermodynamics.
Right. It is fundamentally different. In 88, instability is the attractor. The system's moved into this mode where positive feedback loops are dominant. So instead of dampening shocks, it amplifies them.
So if you poke it, the problem doesn't get smaller, it gets bigger, exponentially.
Yes.
It's like the rules of cause and effect are totally backward from what we expect. It sounds less like a damp sponge and more like, I don't know, a pane of shattered glass. You press on one spot and the stress goes everywhere, instantly.
That is a fantastic analogy. And that's a perfect lead-in to the methodology. They use this calculation called distance to regime.
Right. And you mentioned the 93-100 score, but why should you trust a score that isn't giving you a date? It's not saying the market will crash on Tuesday.
Well, and that's the whole point. It feels like financial astrology if you don't get the concept, right?
Yeah, exactly. What good is it?
Because it's measuring structural capacity, not timing. They deliberately avoid forecasting dates because triggers are random. They're stochastic. What the 93-100 score is doing is measuring fidelity to a theoretical maximum of fragility.
So it's measuring potential energy.
Potential energy, that's the perfect term for it. The report is arguing that the 93 score means the regime, the 88 operating system, is already installed. It's structurally present.
So like a chemical reaction where all the ingredients are in the beaker, the temperature is right.
All conditions are met. And that missing 7%, that's just the spark. The system is already running 88 physics, even if the big explosion hasn't happened yet.
Okay, that makes it much clearer. The wood is dry, it's soaked in gasoline, and we're measuring how saturated it is, not whether someone has lit a match nearby.
You got it.
So let's dive into these 5 dimensions then, because that's what the justification is. And we should start with the 2 that are already scored at a perfect 25 out of 25. These are the completed stages.
Right. The first one is all about the system's ability to absorb mistakes.
Dimension A, slack exhaustion. A perfect 25 out of 25. And it accounts for a quarter of the total fragility score. And slack, I mean, that's the reserve tank, right? The buffer. The report says, I'm quoting here, fiscal, monetary, institutional, narrative slack is gone.
And it's so important to understand what they mean by each of those because slack isn't just about government debt. Fiscal slack, sure, that's low debt. Monetary slack is having room to cut interest rates without, blowing something up.
And institutional slack.
That's public trust. It's faith in the Supreme Court, in Congress, in the process.
But narrative slack, that one's interesting. Why is the story we tell ourselves so important?
Because narrative slack is what allows you to make a mistake and still have the world believe in you. It's the exorbitant privilege the U.S. has had for decades. The world believed in the dollar, so the U.S. could print money and export its inflation without, immediate consequences.
But when that story breaks,
That privilege is gone. And the 25-25 score says all four of those reserves are empty. And that leads to a state they call hypersensitivity.
and this is where it gets really scary, right?
Yeah.
Because that lack of a buffer, it means every big policy decision becomes a binary choice between two disasters.
Yes.
Like the classic example, the Fed raises rates to fight inflation, but in doing so, it risks making the entire banking system insolvent.
Right, because their balance sheets have no slack.
But if they cut rates to save the banks, then they basically admit they have no discipline and risk, hyperinflation. The system is completely and totally cornered.
And you can actually connect this exhaustion directly to Peter Turchin's work on cryodynamics. He maps historical cycles, and he always points to state fiscal distress and elite overproduction as these huge red flags for instability.
That's the mouse utopia idea, right?
Exactly. Turchin's data shows that when a society produces way more highly educated elite aspirants than there are actual elite jobs,
So too many people who want to be senators or CEOs.
then those frustrated elites turn on the system itself. That internal competition just shreds the remaining institutional slack, which just fuels the fire. The system is socially crowded and financially brittle.
Which is the perfect setup for the second maxed out score. Dimension B, epistemic integrity, or what they call lock-in, also 25 out of 25. So this means the system has literally stopped being able to see, admit, and correct its own errors.
It has to. It's the logical result of having no slack. If you can't possibly fix the debt, then you can't admit the debt is a problem. The cost of telling the truth about the debt, about real inflation, is just too high. It would trigger the very collapse you're trying to prevent.
So how does the system keep up the pretense that everything is okay?
It builds a fake reality. The sources call this the Potemkin ledger, like the fake villages built to fool Catherine the Great.
All facade, no substance.
Right. Our official numbers, GDP, unemployment, inflation, they've been, as the word says, falsified or hollowed out. Not necessarily made up, but redefined and managed to project this false image of stability.
And that's the lock-in. The system is now structurally dependent on this lie.
Yes. Correction is unsafe. Admitting the truth would dissolve the facade instantly, so they're locked in. They have no choice but to double down on the deception again and again.
And you see this in intelligence theory, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. This lines up perfectly with Yuri Bezmenov's work on demoralization. He talked about how you can subvert a nation by creating a competing pseudo-reality until the population literally can't process facts anymore. This 25-25 score is basically saying that process is complete. The system is now formally dependent on the fake ledger.
Wow. Okay, so the system has no room for error and no ability to tell the truth. Now we move from those structural conditions to the actual mechanics of failure, how it's going to propagate.
Exactly. The kinetics.
Which brings us to dimension C, coupling active. Scored a full 20 out of 20. This is about synchronization.
In a healthy 66 system, things are loosely coupled. A shock in the financial system takes time to hit the political system, and vice versa. There are lags. Buffers, yeah. But the 88 diagnosis is that these subsystems, governance, the economy, the media narrative, they're now mutually amplifying.
And the source material says it very clearly. Governance instability is driving economic instability.
It's a closed feedback loop, a doom loop. Political desperation leads to reckless economic interventions, like, massive money printing. Those interventions destabilize the markets, which causes more public panic, which creates more political desperation.
And on it goes.
And a key sign of this is that the lag time has vanished. The report says the transmission of shock is now instantaneous, high-frequency trading, social media. A small event in one corner of the system is felt everywhere, immediately.
Which creates the risk of whole system failure. Everything goes down at once.
In lockstep, not staggered over months.
Okay, so that's 70 points to the 93 you counted for.
Yeah.
Now we get to the last two, and this is where we see the gaps, the reasons it's not at 100 yet.
Right.
Dimension D, error propagation. This scored 12 out of 15. This is about nonlinear dynamics.
Yeah, how efficiently small mistakes become total catastrophes. The metaphor they use, which I think is perfect, is the sand pile effect. You pour sand onto a pile. For a while, each grain just makes the pile a little bigger, but eventually the pile reaches its maximum angle, its angle of repose. It becomes critical.
And then one more grain of sand?
Triggers an avalanche of a totally unpredictable size. The system is at that critical angle right now. Small stresses now have huge effects. The intuition they use is no more buys. Every event is an elimination round now.
So why the 3-point gap? If it's that critical, why only 12 out of 15?
Because the biggest avalanche hasn't actually happened yet. The potential is there 100%. The slack is gone, the coupling is active. But that one big trigger event, the one that cascades across